Hello friends, welcome to Mac Truck Bookstop. Mike here, and today we are going to discuss the complete stories by Franz Kafka, or rather my experience with it, because I did not read the entirety, but I have read 9 of the works in here, as well as quite a few of the shorter stories in it. So I also have ranked them as well, so that will give me a bit of a guide for how to proceed in this video. Um, Now, Franz Kafka, of course, I'm counting for the country of Czechia, as it's liked to be called these days. And this is because Franz Kafka was born in Prague, and which is the capital of the country, and spent a good deal of his life there, even though he wrote in German. And in many ways, his family had German ties, and then he actually, I think, died in Austria. So, I mean, I could have counted him for a number of countries, but this seemed like the best, and this project was a great chance for me to experience Kafka for the first time after hearing him referenced in so many works of literature, including many of the works that I've already read up to this point. Tall History of Sugar from Jamaica was one of them that mentioned the Metamorphosis. And actually, in some ways, this book was a Kickstarter for this project. I first read the Metamorphosis around Christmas of, or a little bit after Christmas of 2022, which was right before I published the first video of this project. So, but all of the other stories I've been reading in between the other books that I've done over the last 4 months. So this is, of course, I'm in no place to be a good critic of Kafka, but I can give you my impressions of the stories that I found to be the most relevant to me. Starting kind of from the bottom of the list and working up. So I'll just say, without revealing the rank I'll finally give it, that I loved the Metamorphosis when I read it. I found it very moving, and it was one of those works that really almost made me cry. It was truly moving, and not many books can really put me in that state of mind. I think only 2 or 3, I'd say 3 so far in this project have brought me almost to tears. And I'll talk more about it later on, but the reason I start by saying that is because then I went to the beginning of the book and started reading in order. And on the bottom of my list are the first 2 stories in this collection of complete stories: Description of a Struggle and Wedding Preparations in the Country. I just could not get into them or wrap my head around them at all. They were just too weird, especially Description of a Struggle was just too weird for me to wrap my head around, and I wasn't able to really put any of the symbology together. I didn't feel it was communicated in a clear way. It felt like something that was just describing a dream, or just being weird for the sake of being weird without any real meaning to me. I mean, and maybe somebody else would read this and get something out of it, but it didn't make much sense to me. Moving up from that, we have the Judgement and the Judgement I gave a score of 2 out of 5, and that one started promising, but I didn't really care for or relate to the way it ended, or find it had much meaning. Again, I know that is one of his considered his best works, but I guess understanding a bit of Kafka's life and the trauma he had with his father makes that story make a lot more sense to him. It just wasn't something I particularly related to. Moving up from there, A Hunger Artist was interesting. A Hunger Artist is about a man who is basically starves himself and is like a champion of doing this. Like it garners him attention and I think even awards. But it didn't. To me, it wasn't a very memorable story, as you can tell. I can barely even remember it, even though I read it. And it just it didn't do much for me. Now we get to the ones that I actually would say that I liked. So we've got 5 here, and 6 if you count. I'll say right now, kind of honorable mention, some of the shorter works at the end of this book. So it starts with the longer stories and then ends with the shorter stories. The shorter works, some of them were really interesting. Like, and one of them was actually featured in the book that I did for Argentina a couple videos ago. It's called, what is it called? It's the description of like a creature that doesn't exist. It's called a crossbreed, and then in parentheses, a sport. Um, so that one was interesting because it connected to something else I'd read. There was one about Sancho Panza, but none of them were like knock my socks off. But they were interesting. They were short. It gave you something to think about. But very few actually hit me or connected with me. And I know some of this may be translation issues. I've never read other translations by Kafka, but now that we're moving up into the ones I really liked, I'll have more kind of positive things to say. Um, in the no, A Little Woman. I thought A Little Woman was really interesting because um, it seemed like something that in my life, not me personally, but I've seen this play out in like work situations and in other places in life. It's kind of about a man who is there's the narrator knows that there's this woman that just absolutely hates him, a woman he barely knows, doesn't even mention her name, but she just hates him and he doesn't know why. He doesn't know exactly why. And he spends this whole story basically examining, why does this random woman hate me and what does it mean, and some of the dynamics of that. It's like it's an analysis of this particular feeling that a particular person has toward him with no real explanation, like logical explanation for it. So I found that to kind of ring true with some of the things I've seen in my life, and yeah, so that's why I found it interesting. Alongside that one, ranking 3 out of 5, I would put the Burrow. The Burrow was interesting, describing what I imagine to be a human. It could be a creature. It's not really certain. Who is just burrowing underground and creating these labyrinths, these tunnels underground, and fearing the pursuit of a certain beast, as well as some more primordial things. And it was quite interesting, but I feel like it lost steam towards the end, and felt that it could have ended sooner than it did, and have been better. That was just why I didn't rank it higher, although I really liked how it started. And now we're moving into my top 3. So number 3, In the Penal Colony, describing a torture device on some kind of tropical colony by, I can't remember which empire it was, if it even named it, if it was the Austrian Empire. I don't know, but that's really not important. The fact is, it's a colony, and there's this officer in charge who is really in love with this torture device and like nostalgic about it, even although it seems to be in its last days of use. And the whole kind of the description of the device and what it does is so memorable. But I would say, like, while it was very interesting and very memorable, the ending didn't necessarily have a huge emotional impact on me. It was more of a cerebral kind of, that's interesting sort of story, but definitely worth reading again for me, and one that I would recommend along with the next 2 that I'll talk about for anybody to read. Now, number 2 and number 1 are almost tied. So it's going to be obvious which is the number one when I state number two, but The Country Doctor is number two for me. But again, like I said, could be number one on a different day. And A Country Doctor is likely to be the one that I reread the most times because it's so short. So it's about 3 to 5 pages, uh, depending on, I guess, how it's laid out on the page. But it reminded me of reading Edgar Allan Poe the first time. Some of his really short stories, like Cask of Amontillado, um, was the one that came to mind and kind of just left a really chilling sensation, though I almost find it deeper and more dreamlike, more surreal than Poe's works of this kind of spine-tingling horror. Um, and Without spoiling anything, if there's one that I would definitely recommend you look up, there's plenty of videos on YouTube that like tell the story with visuals and stuff, but see if you can just read it or listen to it. The Country Doctor is absolutely fantastic, almost a perfect short story in some ways, and one of the best I've ever read. Um, I'll talk a bit more about the thoughts and themes of it once I announce, of course, my favorite being the Metamorphosis, which deserves its place as being considered not only the greatest work that Kafka produced, but one of the greatest works of literature of all time. I understand it now. I was so moved by it, and while I'm surprised to see other people kind of focus so much on the social or maybe socio-political implications of the story. I often feel like some of the analyses I've looked up and seen and heard of the Metamorphosis to me miss the point of just the raw emotional struggle of a person with some kind of like mental disability or somebody who's experiencing depression. That this is what the world is like for somebody in the throes of like a serious mental illness, or even somebody with a kind of Parkinson's or degenerative disorder, where they are experiencing all of this suffering and internal turmoil, and other people can see it, but cannot communicate what they're feeling and what they need as much as they want to. They can hear it in their head, but they just can't communicate to others. That if I feel like if somebody's able to connect or has felt like that in your life, all other sort of political implications or social implications that the book might be trying to say go by the wayside. And the fact that the family can't communicate with Gregor, who has turned into a giant insect or vermin, as the best translation probably is. Although this one translated, I believe, as cockroach, it actually gives it a specific name. Insect. They do use the word insect. So vermin is the closest translation from what I could tell, and there's whole articles written just about the first line of the Metamorphosis and what Gregor Samsa actually is. The idea that you never get a full sense of what he actually is also quite powerful, and again, all social and political implications of the story to me fall by the wayside when you just look at the raw empathy that the story produces. And I think that's at its core is what makes it great. Everything else is just, all the other analysis is birthed by the fact that this story can just touch the heartstrings in a way that really no other Kafka story that I've read so far can. Now, of course, I haven't read The Trial or The Castle, which I do plan to at some point. Definitely at some point. Because I can't place those in the order since I haven't read them. But besides the Metamorphosis and the Country Doctor are the two that I guess touched me the most, and that's why they are number 1 and 2. Now I want to go back to The Country Doctor because, and now this may be a bit of a spoiler if you haven't read it, but I found that The Country Doctor had a lot of commentary, a lot to say about. I don't even know if I know what it's trying to say, to be honest. It's one of those things that I feel more than I have the words to express it about the. I think what can be best. I think it can be best summed up by the lines that appear in the very first page. It's almost one of the first lines of the novel that, or the not even not sorry, not novel, short story that is. I want to get it exact. It can be summed up by, you never know what you're going to find in your own house. When right at the beginning of the story, this doctor who is called into the rural countryside, his horse died last night, so he doesn't know where he's going to get a horse. And so he finds a groom and some horses in his own stable where he expected to find nothing. And there's this groom is crawling on all fours. There's something off. There's something wrong and animal about him. Something vampire-like. And this is inferred, of course, but then this doctor's servant girl says, you never know what you're going to find in your own house. And that right there, right on the first page already sends chills down your spine, and the chills don't stop until the end of the story. And that, I think the whole lesson can be summed up by that. No matter what front we put on, what profession we have, especially like the doctor, what great standing we have in society, there is always a kind of darkness lurking beneath the surface. And our mind is always a little bit there, even when we are doing our duty, so to speak. Kafka really kind of reaches to those depths of the human mind that can't be communicated and finds a way to communicate them, which is also why I thought while reading The Country Doctor, this is very dreamlike, but in a much better way than, say, Description of a Struggle, the very first story I talked about. The description of a struggle, I just couldn't make sense of it, and it was way too long. Whereas The Country Doctor, in 3 to 5 pages, created this dreamlike atmosphere while getting the point across, and a few metaphors that just made sense. And that's where I'll stop. This is, again, my introduction to Kafka. I would like to read The Trial in the Castle at some point. But I can definitely see the waves that Kafka has made. Even though I wouldn't call him necessarily my favorite author, I expected to resonate with more of his work than I did, considering how many authors I love have been influenced by him, and how many books I've read that have kind of cited them, but Borges being a fantastic example. Also that book, A Tall History of Sugar. But that's really, I can't say enough good things about the Metamorphosis, The Country Doctor, and I really enjoyed In the Penal Colony, and The Burrow and A Little Woman as well. So there's definitely some great stuff here. And for anyone who hasn't read Kafka, I don't need to recommend him to you. A million other people will. But this is just kind of an important step on this journey of reading the world. And since I'm already well into my next country and enjoying it, I don't feel bad announcing the next books for Iran. We are reading Persepolis, Part 1 and Part 2. I don't have the complete, but they were this is the original way they were published, as 1 and 2. So these, I had watched the movie a long time ago. And now I'm actually getting to read the graphic novel, and I remember parts of the movie, but yeah, it's nice to actually read it. This is becoming a classic of the graphic novel And it's really the first graphic novel I can remember that felt like true literature that I was aware of, even though I only saw the movie and kind of had glanced at the graphic novel. But we're actually going to do another book for Iran as well, something a little older, less modern, a little bit more obscure. The Blind Owl by Sadegh Hidayat. I don't know if I pronounced that right. This is a very short, but has kind of a cult following. It seems some people really love this book, and seems like it's dark on the level of like Pedro Paramo, and it's kind of part of that time period as well. I think it was a little bit before, like the 1930s and 1940s. This is one I really have wanted to read. So we're going to do 2 episodes for Iran, but probably in very short succession because neither of these are very long. And I think I will get through them fairly quickly. So, but no timeline. So I do hope you will continue to join me on this Reading the World journey. I appreciate any comments and appreciate all those who've subscribed and are following. So with that, I hope you have a great day. Feel free to reach out. Thanks.